Welcome to the Mini Book Podcast.
Great to be here.
You found The Deep Dive, the show that really cuts through the noise and gets straight to the core insights from some truly fascinating sources.
That's the goal.
And today we're taking a deep dive into something really timeless, Marcus Aurelius's Meditations.
A classic.
Absolutely. And it's not just, some dusty old historical text. It's this incredibly profound work of self-reflection from someone who was, one of history's most powerful figures, yet also intensely introspective.
That's spot on. And what's really fascinating, I think, is that this isn't your typical dry, ancient philosophy text.
Right.
Meditations is basically a collection of the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius's very personal notes and thoughts. It's almost like reading his private journal.
A conversation with himself.
Exactly. It's kind of a shortcut to being well-informed about, how to live a good life, especially when you're under immense pressure.
Which he certainly was.
Oh, definitely. So we're going to unpack how he navigated the world and himself and figure out why his ideas still hit home so strongly today.
Okay, let's start with the man himself. Let's unpack this extraordinary life. Marcus Aurelius. He was born Marcus Annius Verus, way back in 121 AD.
Right.
His father died young, so his grandfather raised him. Now, the sources, like the Historia Augusta, they say he was a serious kid, but we shouldn't just picture him like alone in a corner with a book, should we?
No, not at all. That's a common misconception. He was definitely serious, but he was also a very active upper-class youth. Think boxing, wrestling, running.
Falconry, even.
Falconry, ball games, hunting the works. So yeah, imagine an emperor who could probably outrun you.
Easily.
And then sit down and philosophize about the nature of the universe. It's quite the image.
It really is. And his education must have been top-notch.
Oh, absolutely rigorous. His first instructors for the basics were likely slaves, which was common.
Mm-hmm.
But then came the private tutors for literature. The big names, Virgil, Homer, Euripides. The absolute classics. But literature was just the foundation. The real goal for a young man potentially heading for public life was rhetoric, the art of persuasion.
Makes sense.
And he was completely bilingual. Fluent in Latin, of course, learning from figures like Cicero, but also Greek, studying orators like Demosthenes. And this is key. Greek was overwhelmingly the language of philosophy back then.
Okay.
Which explains perfectly why Meditations, his personal notes, were written in Greek, not his native Latin.
That's a fascinating detail. Now, his path to actually becoming emperor was quite roundabout, wasn't it? Not a direct line.
Not at all. Really unexpected. Emperor Hadrian, he was childless. So he adopted Antoninus.
Okay.
But on one condition, that Antoninus in turn had to adopt Marcus.
Wow. Okay, so a succession plan, basically.
Pretty much. So, bang, in 137 AD, Marcus, who was just 16, suddenly becomes Marcus Aurelius Antoninus.
16?
Yeah. And then Hadrian dies the very next year, and Marcus is first in line for the throne. Talk about a rapid ascent.
No kidding. So his education must have kicked into even a higher gear then, as the heir apparent.
It absolutely did. He kept up his Greek rhetoric studies with Herodes Atticus, who was, by the way, this incredibly famous and wealthy orator.
Yeah.
And Latin oratory with Marcus Cornelius Fronto. We actually have letters from Fronto.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and they're fascinating because Fronto kind of regrets Marcus shifting his focus so heavily from rhetoric, which Fronto loved, towards philosophy.
A bit of tutor disappointment there.
Maybe a little.
Yeah.
But beyond the formal lessons, Marcus had this informal legal and political apprenticeship, learning the ropes from older public figures.
Practical experience.
Exactly. But probably the biggest influence on his actual leadership style was his adopted father, Antoninus Pius. His calm, steady rule was a huge example for Marcus.
So he becomes this philosopher-king, but you mentioned the pressures wars, plague, tribes on the border. It sounds anything but calm and steady. How did that philosophical side actually, work in the messy day-to-day of being emperor?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's what makes him so compelling. The historian Edward Gibbon famously said Antoninus's reign didn't offer much for history books.
Pretty uneventful.
Right. Marcus's reign was similar in terms of, say, quiet administration when possible, but the external pressures were immense. See, an emperor had vast power in theory.
Right.
But in practice, a lot of the job was just administrative grind, fielding problems from far-flung provinces, judging legal cases, dealing with endless petitions.
The imperial inbox must have been something else.
You can only imagine. But here's where the philosophy perhaps comes in. Marcus showed this scrupulous attention to detail, especially to language. in his official documents. That precision, maybe from his rhetoric training, maybe from philosophy.
He brought that philosopher's mind to the paperwork.
In a way, yes. Bringing precision to the mundane, you could say.
Did that philosophy seep into his actual policies, or was it more just for him, an internal way to cope?
I think it was probably both. You do see hints of his convictions in policy. Like, he showed a real interest in laws around freeing slaves and protecting orphans.
Interesting.
And some scholars connect that to his Stoic ideas about common humanity, or maybe even his own experience losing his father early on.
Makes sense.
But yeah, his reign was far from peaceful. Huge challenges. The Parthian War, for starters, led by his co-emperor Lucius Verus, who wasn't exactly known for his military expertise.
Not ideal.
Not ideal. Then a devastating plague brought back by the troops from the east. It wiped out huge numbers of people, crippled the army.
Just one crisis after another.
Pretty much. And all the while, increasing instability on the northern frontier. Aggressive tribes like the Quadi constantly pushing against the borders.
So a really tough gig. And towards the end of his life, his health was declining.
Yes, in his 50s, his health started to fail. And then there's the, well, controversial decision to make his own son Commodus, his co-emperor and successor.
Breaking that tradition of adopting the best man for the job.
Exactly. It broke that chain of adoptive emperors. Why did he do it? Maybe the immense stress of that final decade, maybe the shock of that revolt by Avidius Cassius.
Ah, yes, the general who declared himself emperor.
That's the one. Forced Marcus into basically a civil war scenario. Maybe after all that, he just wanted stability, even if it meant promoting his own, perhaps less suitable son.
Such a complex life. Which brings us back to the philosophy. Given all that chaos, war, plague, revolt, personal loss, what exactly was the philosophical bedrock he clung to? How did he find any consolation?
Yeah, that's the core of it, isn't it? And you have to remember, in ancient times, philosophy wasn't just like an academic subject you studied.
Right, it was a way of life.
Totally. A complete guide to living well. And Marcus's main system was Stoicism, founded by Zeno, developed by others like Cleanthes and Chrysippus.
Okay, Stoicism, what are the basics?
At its heart, it was a deterministic system.
Yeah.
They believed everything that happens, every event, is governed by the logos.
The logos.
Yeah, think of it as a kind of universal reason or divine principle that orders the entire cosmos. Impersonal, rational.
Okay, so if everything is determined by this logos, where does free will fit in? That sounds tricky.
It does sound tricky, but the Stoic idea of free will is really interesting. It's not about changing your fate, because you can't. It's about voluntary accommodation to what is, in any case, inevitable.
Voluntary accommodation.
Yeah, there's this famous analogy they used. Imagine a dog tied to a moving wagon.
Okay.
If the dog chooses to trot along with the wagon, it moves freely, with purpose, alongside it. If it digs its heels in and resists, well, it gets dragged along anyway.
Ouch. But it's still being dragged because it chose to resist.
Exactly. That's the key insight. You can't control the external events, the wagon's path, but you are absolutely responsible for your internal response, your choice to run along or to resist.
That's a powerful image. So the takeaway isn't trying to dodge challenges, but choosing how you engage with them.
Yeah.
You're responsible for your inner state, even when facing fate.
Precisely. And this leads directly into the 3 core Stoic disciplines. These are really the practical heart of the meditations, the actionable stuff.
Okay, what are they?
First, perception. This isn't just about seeing. It's about seeing things objectively, stripping away your emotional baggage, your judgments.
How do you do that?
Marcus has this great line where he tells himself not to think of philosophy as your instructor, but as the sponge and egg white that relieve ophthalmia, like an eye infection, as a soothing ointment.
So philosophy is a tool to clarify your vision, not just tell you what to think.
Exactly. The core idea is your perception shapes your reality. Control how you see something and you control its power over you.
That's huge. So the harm isn't inherent in the event, it's in our interpretation of it.
You got it. Taking ownership of that internal landscape.
Okay.
It's discipline 1. Then there's action.
Okay.
The Stoics saw humans as fundamentally social creatures. We're meant to cooperate. Marcus brings this up again and again in Meditations.
Like working together for the common good.
Precisely. Our duty is to act unselfishly for the collective good. Now, it was within a hierarchical society, so it meant treating people appropriately according to their role, but always with that goal of contributing positively. The key insight, act for the common good, always.
Makes sense for an emperor, that civic duty aspect. Okay, perception, action. What's the third?
The third is will. This is all about our attitude towards things we cannot control.
The external stuff again.
Right. Things like illness, death, other people doing wrong.
Mm-hmm.
These things don't truly harm us, according to the Stoics, unless we choose to see them as harmful.
So choosing your reaction again.
Exactly. This is what the philosopher Epictetus called the art of acquiescence. Accepting what fate or the logos brings with a clear, rational mind, not fighting it internally. The key insight. Embrace what you can't change. Understand that true harm only comes from your own flawed judgments.
Wow. Perception, action, will. It sounds incredibly demanding, almost rigid. For Marcus, facing plague and war, how realistic was it to just acquiesce?
Well, that's the whole point of the meditations, I think. It wasn't easy. It was a constant struggle, a daily practice. He wasn't writing down achievements. He was writing reminders. Strive for this objectivity. Remember your duty. Try to accept what you can't control.
So it's the effort, the process.
Exactly. These three disciplines are the absolute core of his thought. He lays them out repeatedly, sometimes very starkly. They're his personal marching orders because, yeah, he found it incredibly difficult too.
And you mentioned he usually just says philosophy, not stoicism. Did he draw inspiration from elsewhere too? Was he purely Stoic?
Good question. No, he wasn't dogmatically rigid. His thinking is actually quite ecumenical, meaning he was happy to borrow good ideas from other schools of thought if he found truth in them.
Like who?
Socrates was a massive influence, huge. Marcus admired his character, his endurance, his integrity, especially how Socrates faced death without fear. You see that mentioned.
Okay.
And also Heraclitus, one of the pre-Socratics, famous for saying you can't step in the same river twice.
The philosopher of change.
Right. Heraclitus really influenced Marcus's constant theme of impermanence, of everything being in flux. That famous line, time is a river, a violent current of events, that's pure Heraclitus echoing through Marcus.
That's fascinating. What about rival schools? Like the Epicureans, they were all about pleasure, weren't they? Seems opposite to Stoicism.
Totally opposite in many ways. And Marcus generally disapproved of their focus on pleasure as the main goal. But, and this shows his pragmatism, he was willing to, quote, accept truth wherever he found it.
So even from the rival?
Even from the rivals. He actually quotes Epicurus a few times, seemingly with approval, on things like how to endure pain or how to behave well when you're sick.
Wow.
It shows he wasn't just blindly following Stoic dogma. He was essentially thinking, if this is true and it helps me live virtuously, I'll use it. That feels quite modern, actually.
It really does. Okay, let's shift focus to the book itself, Meditations. You mentioned that title is probably not original.
Yeah, that's the long-established title, but it's almost certainly not what Marcus called it. It's likely the original Greek was something like Eishuden to himself.
To himself.
Because he never meant for it to be published. It wasn't written for us. It was his own private notebook, his spiritual exercises, a self-help book in the most literal sense, helping himself.
That explains so much. The tone, right? Do this, remember that.
Exactly. That imperative voice. And the repetition. He keeps circling back to the same core themes because he needed the constant reminders. It's like reading someone's personal struggle and practice laid bare.
And book one is different, you said.
It really stands out. Some translations call it Debts and Lessons. It's basically autobiographical. He reflects quite systematically on all the people who shaped him, family, teachers, his adopted father Antoninus, even the gods.
A gratitude journal, almost.
Kind of, yeah. It shows a real conscious structure, unlike the rest of the entries, which feel more like random notes jotted down maybe in a military camp or late at night. Book one feels deliberately composed.
And the style of the entries themselves, they vary a lot.
Hugely. Some are like mini essays. Others are just short, punchy aphorisms, like that famous one, "The best revenge is not to be like that."
Classic.
Absolutely. Then you get these beautiful analogies like comparing human lives to many lumps of incense on the same altar, all consumed eventually.
Wow.
And sometimes it's like he's having a debate with himself, arguing different points. You can really see his training and rhetoric shining through even in these private jottings. The man knew how to structure an argument.
But despite the focus on reason and resilience, there's a certain sadness to it.
Definitely. There's a distinct tone of melancholy that runs through it, especially when he talks about how fleeting everything is. Human life, fame, power, it all passes away.
Kind of sobering.
It can be. One scholar actually noted that reading Meditations for too long can make you feel a bit melancholy yourself. And Matthew Arnold, the poet who loved the book, felt its main flaw was that it didn't really make much room for joy. It's all about resisting pain, finding serenity, but not necessarily happiness. More defense than offense, maybe.
That's a good way to put it. Look at the military imagery he uses. The soul is posted at its duty. The mind should be an invulnerable fortress. It's very much about building resilience against the world's hardships.
An invulnerable fortress that really captures it. It highlights that internal battle he was fighting. Given that focus on transience and defense, did he ever really find peace, do you think? Or just a kind of disciplined resignation?
That's the deep question, isn't it? He seems to be constantly striving for serenity, for that inner calm. Maybe peace isn't the absence of struggle, but the ability to maintain equilibrium within it. That seems to be his goal.
And what about the divine? You mentioned the logos, this impersonal force, but then he thanks the gods personally. How does that fit?
It's another fascinating tension in the book. Stoicism generally equates God or the gods with nature or the logos, this rational, impersonal principle ordering things. Very different from a personal deity.
But Marcus, well, sometimes he sounds much more personal. He thanks the gods for specific things like remedies granted through dreams, or talks about feeling their power over and over.
That sounds more like a personal relationship.
It does. How did he reconcile that personal feeling with the impersonal logos of Stoic theory? We don't really know for sure. Maybe he held both ideas simultaneously. Maybe it shows the limits of pure philosophical systems when faced with the complexities of human experience.
A very human inconsistency, perhaps.
Perhaps. And speaking of survival, it's pretty amazing the meditation's text survived at all.
Really? How so?
Well, it wasn't published, remember. It seems to have survived by chance in the Greek-speaking East for centuries, often unread, passed down through handwritten copies that accumulated errors along the way. The first actual printed edition wasn't until 1559.
Wow, so it could easily have been lost.
Easily. It's a real testament to its power that it endured despite that precarious journey and is still being translated and debated today.
Absolutely incredible. So bringing it all together, what does this mean for you listening right now? Why should we care about this Roman emperor's private notes?
Well, the Meditations has resonated with people for centuries. Frederick the Great, U.S. presidents, poets like Matthew Arnold, Joseph Brodsky, William Alexander Percy called it the unassailable wintry kingdom of Marcus Aurelius.
A wintry kingdom, I like that.
It offers this incredibly powerful framework for building resilience, for finding your own inner fortress in a world that often feels just as chaotic as Marcus's did.
It's not just the philosophy itself, though, is it?
No, I think the real genius is that raw honesty. You're reading an emperor's private struggle to be good, to be virtuous, while carrying immense responsibility. It doesn't promise easy happiness.
No quick fixes.
Definitely not. But it offers a way to navigate difficulty, to resist being overwhelmed by pain, and maybe find some measure of serenity. It's a guide on how to think, not what to think.
And even though our world is so different from ancient Rome, those core challenges dealing with difficult people, facing setbacks, finding purpose, maintaining inner calm when everything outside is shouting, they're still fundamentally human challenges.
Absolutely.
His questions are still our questions, really.
Think about that image you mentioned earlier, Joseph Brodsky, the poet, having a terrible evening, seeing the statue of Marcus Aurelius on horseback in Rome, and finding some comfort in its silent, steady endurance through time.
It's a powerful image. This deep dive hopefully shows not just a historical figure, but a fellow human being grappling with how to live a meaningful life, striving for goodness, for clarity.
So the question we leave you with is, what might you discover if you take your own deep dives into these pages? How might Marcus's struggle help you navigate your own inner chaos?